So, as you guys know, we've been doing a study in Philippians. And when I was asked to talk today, I really started thinking about what God was trying to say. What God's been trying to say as we've been studying Philippians and just understanding, okay, God, what is it that you're trying to get across to us? And I really believe that there is one common theme, and that's to be more like Jesus. Out of the letters that Paul wrote, Philippians is one of the only ones that is a letter of encouragement and not a letter of correction. So we're going to dig right in, and I think that the letter of encouragement is to encourage us to love others, to be compassionate, to live spirit-filled lives, to live lives of service, to be more like Jesus and less like ourselves. So we're going to start at chapter 2, verse 19. And in this chapter, Paul gives two examples of what it is to live like Christ, to live a Christ-like life. In chapter 2, verse 19, it starts off, it says, "If the Lord is willing, I hope to send Timothy to you soon for a visit. And then he can cheer me up by telling me how you are getting along. For I have no one like Timothy who is genuinely concerned about your welfare. All the others only care about themselves and not what matters to Jesus Christ. But you know Timothy. He has proved himself like a son with his father. He has served with me preaching the good news. I hope to send him to you soon. I hope to send him to you just as soon as I know what's happening here with me. I have confidence from the Lord that I myself may come to see you soon." So we're going to stop right there really quickly. So if you don't know who Timothy was a young man who his father was Greek and his mother was Jewish. And she gave her life to God and converted over to Christianity and began to follow Jesus. And Timothy was raised by his mother and his grandmother. And Paul actually commends them and gives them like a lot of recognition for raising Timothy up to be an awesome man of God. They taught him the word. They taught him what it was to love Jesus and to live a spirit-filled life. So Paul comes into Timothy's life and eventually takes him under his wing and begins to disciple him. And while doing that, Paul teaches him how not just to know the word, but to live a life built on faith, to be rooted and grounded in Jesus, and to live by example, to care about the things that matter to Jesus. So Timothy developed a heart for God's people. He was concerned about the things that concerned God. He was worried about the well-being of the church. He wanted to make sure that the believers knew what it was to be steadfast. He was selfless. Unlike some of the other people who were out preaching around Paul's time or who said that they were involved with Paul, they were very selfish. They were concerned about being known and making money and not necessarily building the kingdom of God. I think as believers, it's very easy to get sidetracked. We might begin to focus on like work, all the different situations that we have going on in our lives, and forget about what matters most, and that's focusing on Jesus and building the kingdom. So Timothy is an example of how we're supposed to live Christ-like lives. We're supposed to be asking God daily, God, prick my heart with the things that prick your heart. Let me have a heart that's willing to serve, to be concerned about the people who you care about the most. I think sometimes we get caught up in titles and caught up in being known, but as believers, we have to not focus on being hood famous, but be kingdom known, where Jesus knows who we are. And that is the purpose and calling and the mission that we should be on. Jesus lived his life like this. He knew that the Father's heart was broken and wanted a connection with the lost. So he decided to become sin and lay down his life so we can be reconciled to him, so we can have a relationship with him and know the Father's love and have a relationship with Jesus. So we're going to go to verse 25, and we're going to talk about another man who Paul gives an example of, and his name was Epaphroditus. And it says, "Meanwhile, I thought I should send Epaphroditus back to you. He is a true brother, a co-worker and fellow soldier. He was your messenger to me in my time of need." So a little bit about Epaphroditus. He went and he was from Philippi. The church of Philippians actually sent Epaphroditus to Paul with a financial offering. They sent him with a gift. And when they sent him with a gift, as you continue to read, the dialogue and the way that Paul talks about him, I really believe that he wasn't just somebody who came with a gift, but he was somebody who was an encouragement to Paul. He was somebody who poured into him, that he played a role in Paul's life in helping him to be filled back up. And it says, Paul referred to him as a co-worker, a friend, a friend, and a true brother. It says, and I am sending him back to you because he has been longing to see you. He was very distressed when he heard that you were ill, and he certainly was ill. In fact, he almost died. But God had mercy on him and also me, so that I would not have one sorrow after another. So to me right there, that means that they had a relationship. They were kindred spirits. It says, so I am all the more anxious to send him back to you, for I know that you will be glad to see him, and then I will not be so worried about you. Welcome him in the Lord's love and with great joy, and give him the honor that people like him deserve, for he risked his life for the work of Christ, and he was at the point of death while doing for me what you could not do from afar. So right here, Paul is saying that this man risked his life. He gave everything so that way he could be a blessing to Paul. Paul is saying honor him because he made a sacrifice. Epaphroditus made a decision that he was going to do whatever he could to help benefit the kingdom, even if it cost him his own life. He reflected Jesus in his life. He wasn't worried about losing it. And that's very much what Jesus did. I started thinking about what it means to, when Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians, follow me as I follow Christ. And I started really pondering on it, what does that mean? And then I looked, and Paul actually gives a rundown of the things that he went through. And he says, and this is in 2 Corinthians 11, he said, I work much harder. I've been jailed more often, beat up more times than I can count, at death's door, time after time. I've been flogged 5 times by the Jews, 39 lashes, beaten by the Romans with rods 3 times, pummeled with rocks once. I've been shipwrecked 3 times, immersed in the open sea, a day and a night, in hard traveling year in and year out. I've had to fawn rivers, fend off robbers, struggle with friends, struggle with foes. I've been at risk in the city and at risk in the country, endangered by desert sun and sea storm, and betrayed by those who I thought were my brothers. I've known drudgery and hard labor, and many a long and lonely night without sleep. Many a missed meal, blasted by the cold, naked to the weather. And that's not the half of it. That's a whole lot. He said, and that's not the half of it. When you throw in the daily pressures of all the churches, so you have to remember, Paul was ministering to all these churches while all of this was going on. He says, when you throw in the daily pressures and anxieties of all the churches, when someone gets at the end of their rope, I feel desperation in my bones. When someone is duped into sin, an angry fire burns in my gut. So that means while all of this is going on, he's still interceding. He's still praying for the people of God. That was not his concern, the things that he was going through. It was the people of God that he was concerned about. He said, if I brag about myself, I brag about the humiliations that make me like Jesus. The eternal and blessed God, our Father and Master, knows I'm not lying. At this moment, Paul is describing how he made a choice. He made a choice that despite being robbed, despite facing consequences, despite being jailed, despite all the things that he was going through, being shipwrecked, that he was still going to make a conscious choice to serve others for Jesus because he wanted to look like Jesus. And then I started to think a little bit deeper. So Paul went through all of that. And he says, follow me as I follow Christ. And then I started to look at Jesus. In Luke chapter 22, Jesus goes to the Mount of Olives. And when you read it, This was a place that he went to frequently. This wasn't just a one-time occurrence. This was a place that he went to often. And he went there and he began to pray. And the weight of what was about to take place began to rest on his shoulders. And it talks about how he was in anguish. He was in so much anguish concerning the decision that he was going to have to make that he began to sweat blood. And angels came down and ministered to him. At that moment, Jesus made a choice that regardless of the pain, he was going to lay down his life. Regardless of how uncomfortable it was, he was going to pour out his life so that others could have a chance to experience the Father's love. The work of Calvary didn't begin at the cross, but it was a choice made by Jesus to be broken at Gethsemane. It was a place where he went to pray, a place of intimacy between him and the Father, a place where he submitted his will and took up God's. That's what it looks like when Paul says, "Follow me as I follow Jesus." He was willing to make the choice to lay down his life, to serve others, to pour out. But part of that is we can't pour from an empty place. We can't pour out our lives for others on empty. So I just want to give an example. I need some help. Come here. I'm calling him because he was already up here with me. I need you to hold the mic. So this bowl right here, I'm going to move my tablet because I don't want to wet it. This bowl right here, this represents the world. This is everybody who you know, who you don't know, the people that you've been praying for, the lost, the broken, the hurting. And this is us as believers. Now, we can pour out to people. But once we pour out from ourselves, we're on empty. And that's not a place that we can pour from. This is a place that leads to being burnt out. This is a place of emptiness. We can't pour from ourselves. But when we go to a place like Gethsemane and we get into the presence of God, then he can fill us, and then we can pour out from a place of overflow. We can begin to pour into others, not from a place of lacking, but a place where God is filling us up. And then it can pour out into other people in our lives. I keep mentioning Gethsemane because it wasn't just a garden. Gethsemane was actually an oil press. It was a place where oil was made, where olives were crushed. And I think that there's beauty in that significance, that Jesus went to a place of crushing, a place of breaking, and he made a conscious decision to lay down his will for the will of the Father so he could live his life for others. Gethsemane for us is the presence of God. Getting into the presence of God and laying down everything. Because what happens is when we go to Gethsemane and we get in the presence of God, our anxiety, God crushes it, and from it pours peace. God crushes our hurt, our pain, and he pours out hope. God crushes our pride, and he gives us patience and love and kindness and mercy to give to others. So we can pour out of a place of his presence, not from our own self, but to give. God called us to make disciples. He called us to be like him. He went to a place that was broken and became broken for others. I'm no better than Jesus. But if I'm going to live like Paul said, where he says, follow me as I follow Christ, that means that I need to be in a place of brokenness. I need to be a place where I submit my will to the Father and say, God, I lay down my life. I lay down my life for others, for love, so they can know you, so they can have a relationship with you. It doesn't matter if I'm uncomfortable. God, there's people that I need to see loved. There's people that I want to see set free and delivered, but I can't pour from out of myself. I have to be in the presence of God. The Bible talks about miracles, signs, and wonders will follow them that believe. It talks about greater things what we do. That's what it says in Acts. Greater things. These are where the greater things come from his presence, allowing him to pour into us so we can overflow on the loved ones that are broken. We can overflow into a hurting and broken world. We can pour out God's love, but we have to be in his presence. And this is not something that just takes place here on Sunday. Gethsemane is at home, in your house, in your car, on your knees, in the presence saying, God, I give you my everything. And despite how uncomfortable it is, despite how much I have to give up, I want to see you. I don't care if anybody here knows my name. As long as I'm known in the kingdom, that's all that matters. There are people who are waiting for you to step into what God called you to do. There's a scripture that says the whole earth is groaning, waiting for the sons of God to appear. That is you. We are the sons of God that they're waiting for. But we have to be willing to pour out our lives. I want us to go back into a time of worship because I think some of us might feel that heaviness that Tiffany was talking about. And there's two types of heaviness. There's a heaviness because we're carrying too much and we need God to break us and to free us from these things. But then there's the other heaviness that Tiffany talked about, where it's that burden on your heart, that burning, that crying out that, God, I know you're calling me for more. God, I want to be in your presence. I feel you tugging on me.